As Americans, we love to eat this chocolate cookie with cream in the middle. It's called the Oreo. And the Oreo is known all around the world as kind of the symbol of American confectionery goods. However, where did the Oreo come from? And what does the name mean? Well, that actually ties into New York City history today as we look at these two huge buildings, and at the end we see one of the buildings at Hudson Yards. They're connected by one main thoroughfare that both made the Meatpacking District one of the most popular neighborhoods in New York City today, and Hudson Yards, one of the largest development projects in US history. That one connective tissue is the High Line. Today we're going to walk under the High Line in order to learn what secrets are lurking in this very popular elevated park. I'm Ariel with Urbanist, and today we're walking through history in 30 minutes or less. Welcome everyone to the Meatpacking District. A lot of people might call this also Chelsea. However, in New York City, there's a lot of micro neighborhood names. And we are starting right by 9th Avenue and 15th Street, right by the largest Starbucks in all of New York City, one of the largest Starbucks also in the world. It's not much of a Starbucks, it's more like a theme park for coffee. However, right here in 1997, a food market opened. It was the Chelsea Market, as its logo is the cow, which will tie into the namesake of this neighborhood, the Meatpacking District, a little bit later. The Chelsea Market ended up becoming very popular in the late 2000s, and then Google last year bought this building for a whopping $2 billion plus. One of the largest real estate deals in all of American history. However, this building traces its history back to the Oreo, because in March 1912, this iconic cookie was invented right here. This was the Nabisco Factory, also known as the National Biscuit Company. It was at first a conglomeration of various baking companies coming together under one building, and the building kept growing larger and larger and larger. However, the Oreo patented this cooking, but they weren't the original ones who made it. Just a few years prior, the Sunshine Baking Company made the Hydrox cookie. Now, the Hydrox cookie didn't catch on because they were sued for trademark by the Hydrox Company, who made hydrogen peroxide. And if you drink hydrogen peroxide in high amounts, it's a deadly poison. And many people at that time actually died of hydrogen peroxide poisoning. What made the Sunshine Company name their new cookie something that sounds like hydrogen peroxide? No one really knows. But it never caught on, and the National Biscuit Company, also known as Nabisco, ended up inventing the Oreo and ended up becoming popular worldwide, the second best-selling cookie in the US. However, you can imagine coming back here in the early 1900s, smelling the smell of baked goods, the hustle and bustle of not just a bunch of tourists and shoppers and clubbers, but of workmen, of people working in the meatpacking industry, baking, hauling cargo off the railroad. That was the scene back then. And this sky bridge is one of the few remaining sky bridges in New York City. And probably the most photographed one, along with Gimbel's Sky Bridge in Herald Square. Now, this was built in order to unite two buildings under the same owner, which was the National Biscuit Company. But that's where the High Line comes into play. Let's walk over to the High Line. And right by here we have the Chelsea Market. Lots of great eateries inside here. Bars and shopping as well. And also there's a locals market underneath in the basement. However, before we actually get to the High Line, where does the word Oreo come from? The word Oreo come from, there's three main theories, though no one knows for sure. One of them is that it's after one of the Greek gods. The other one is that it's named after the word gold in French, because the first boxes sold were gold in color, the tin boxes that where Oreos were sold. The third theory is that it's a combination of cream O's, of them calling it a cream sandwich and making those words together. Here is one of my favorite coffee shops, highly recommended, the Blue Bottle Coffee. It's a chain coffee shop in various U.S. cities, started in San Francisco. Now they're here also in New York City, have been so for the past a little bit like 15 years or so. And here we have the High Line. But why was the High Line built? And why did a park end up taking its place? Well, for that, let's take a view of exactly the route the High Line took along the west side of Manhattan. Here at the end of Chelsea Market is Artisan Fleas, local craft goods. And here we get a sense of what the High Line is. Back in the mid-1800s, when the west side of Manhattan was the main area for manufacturing, meat packing, dairy industry, textile industry, basically every major industry was concentrated along the west side because of its access to the Hudson River. The railroad passed right in the middle of 11th and 10th Avenue. The problem with the railroad passing right in the middle of the street was that right next to all these industrial buildings were residential buildings of the poorest of the poor of New York who worked in these very manufacturing buildings. Little kids would be over here. People of all ages would be running around the street. It was a heavily trafficked thoroughfare. And a huge hunking piece of metal rolling down, pumping steam into the air was bad news for its pedestrians. Over 500 people died in a few decades right along this avenue, gaining the nickname Death Avenue. Something had to be done. And by the 1930s, finally the city relented and decided to force the railroad companies to elevate the railroad and build the High Line across Manhattan, all the way ending at St. John's Terminal in Soho. And this railroad would cut through the buildings such as the Nabisco factory right over here, providing direct access to offload the cargo. However, Death Avenue lasted way longer than it needed to. And since the railroads resisted for so long to build an elevated railroad, in order to get in the good spirits of the public again, who railed against the railroad passing in the middle of the street, they decided to hire a group of 12 cowboys, in order to clear the way from pedestrians getting too close to the steaming junk of metal rolling down a mere 5 miles per hour down the street. They will be armed with red flags, or at night they'll be armed with red lights. However, one of those cowboys' name was Ezekiel Marcus. And Ezekiel Marcus was the very last West Side cowboy to be hired by the railroad company. He did not want to ever leave, because 75 years later, according to Joshua David, one of the two men who started the funding for building the High Line, his partner Robert Hammond, he told a class in 2006 of paranormal student researchers in Columbia University about a strange man he saw appear in his bedroom as he was chatting with Edward Norton, the famous actor, who was also one of the first initial funders of the High Line project. He dropped the phone during the middle of the conversation of Edward Norton because he was absolutely stunned by this ghostly figure that appeared right in front of him, wearing corduroy pants and a huge cowboy hat. The man said, "Do not build anything above my grave." Joshua David was stunned. A few days later, Robert Hammond also saw the same man, issuing the same exact warning to not build above his grave. Otherwise, he will rain and storm this new construction project. They do some investigation to see who was this apparition. And they found out that this apparition was a man by the name of Ezekiel Marcus. He was the very last West Side cowboy who died and was buried right along Death Avenue. The strange thing is that Joshua David and Robert Hammond decided not to heed the warning. They were spooked out, but that wasn't going to stop them to beautify New York City, to make the West Side and revitalize it with a beautiful elevated park, something that the world has barely encountered outside of the Parc Planty in Paris. Well, the first few months of the High Line being built, 2008, it was the rainiest months in New York City history, delaying the construction of the High Line by many, many months. Was it the ghost of Ezekiel Marcus? Who knows? However, if you see the film Ghostbusters, there's a great scene where the ghosts are being let out in the movie, and suddenly they start invading New York City. There is two watchmen right around this area, and they were looking at this very port, or former port, seeing a bunch of ghosts coming off a ghostly ship. That ghostly ship was one of the largest ocean liners that hit an iceberg in April 1912, just a month after the Oreo was invented. We all know that ship's name because we learned about it in all of our textbooks, and we've seen one of the most popular movies ever released, Titanic. Because this was the grand entrance of the Cunard White Star Ocean Liner port. This is where the Titanic was supposed to land, but never did. Instead, the Carpathia, bringing its survivors, ended up landing in this port. A lot of them still reeling from the friends and family that they lost on board. A few months later, actually 3 years later, a ship sailed off called Lusitania, and it never arrived to its destination because it was shot off the coast of Ireland by the Germans, inciting the United States entering World War I. And across, behind the port, we see the skyline of Jersey City. But where does the neighborhood name of Meatpacking come from? Well, for that, let's walk down through here. Behind the High Line, here's the Standard Hotel. Now, if you look up at the Standard Hotel, people used to play a game where they would see if anyone is exposing themselves on the windows of the Standard. The reason this happened was because a movie came out around the early 2000s called Shame, starring Michael Fassbender, and there was a scene where he has intercourse right in front of one of the windows. A lot of people started copying the scene and doing it themselves with their respective partners on the very windows of the Standard right on top of the High Line. And the Standard Hotel got so fed up with it that they had to put letters on the pillows to new guests saying, please do not expose yourself on the window. Right over there we see the Whitney Museum, built by Renzo Piano, one of the most famous architects in modern history. And here we have the namesake of the Meatpacking District, the very few meat packers that survive in this neighborhood. The London Meat Company, the Weishel Company, and the John W. Williams Company, selling cow, lamb, veal, poultry, and pork. This entire neighborhood used to be filled with a lot of meat packers. Blood would be running down the drains due to so much meat being processed through this very neighborhood. It's because New York City used to be the capital of meat and dairy a little bit further down in Tribeca. However, if New York City was providing so much meat, not just to the city, but to a huge portion of the United States of America during the 1800s, where were the cows? Well, the cows were actually brought into the city across the Hudson by boat, and then they would be brought here. But as we know, with a huge steaming train passing through the middle of the avenue, cows would make even worse traffic nightmare. And hence, apparently, New York City built tunnels right underneath the streets in order to facilitate the cows to go underneath traffic. Those cow tunnels apparently ran from modern day Hudson Yards to probably down here. Only a few remnants have been found, but no one knows if there's still tunnels underneath. Here we're right underneath the High Line, and we're heading to our final stop. This is one of the most old school diners you'll find in this area, called Hector's Diner. Diners were a popular staple of New York City life for nearly a century, but they're starting to disappear now. These are many of the industrial buildings of the Meatpacking District that are now high-end retail. Further down is Washington Street, very beautiful street of the West Village, which we'll explore later on in a different episode of this series. And here's the High Line. It extends all the way from Gansevoort Street, right by the Whitney, 1.45 miles extending all the way to Hudson Yards, right by 34th Street and Jacob Javits Center. We can see 30 Hudson Yards kind of peeking right over there. taller than the Empire State Building. But in the 1980s, 1970s, no one really wanted to live here. It was very empty, very dark because of the High Line. It wasn't a beautiful park then. It was abandoned, making for places where crime would thrive. And also, some of the most outlandish clubs opened up in the Meatpacking District. One of the most outlandish clubs was actually the main focus of the film Cruising, starring Al Pacino, where Al Pacino was hunting down a murderer who was a member of these gay clubs all around Meatpacking District. And the mine shaft was his focus, right here at 835 Washington Street. Now it's called the Sugar Factory. But the mine shaft was notorious for being a very outlandish club, very hedonistic, and in its basement level was a leather-only Pirates-themed bar. Its main patrons were Freddie Mercury and the French philosopher Foucault. To this day, the Meatpacking District is still a center of clubbing, however, no longer as outlandish as the days of the mine shaft and the few other bars that used to be here. Today, it's more centered around dancing and drinking, such as the bar Le Bain, which is all the way on top of the Standard. Probably one of the best views that you can do while partying. Thank you everyone so much for watching this adventure through the Meatpacking District underneath the High Line. I hope you enjoyed it. Keep watching new episodes on YouTube, and also keep being awesome and always keep on exploring. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Oh, do not look over there. All right, bye everyone. I'm Ariel with Urbanist. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to see more videos of exploring cities all around the world and its history, please subscribe and click that bell button for notifications. Also, if you want to support this channel and get access to exclusive videos, go to patreon.com/urbanist. Keep being awesome and always keep on exploring.